I don't have a banner at the top saying the meeting's being recorded. There we go. Brilliant. Okay. Mr. Robson, would you like to continue?
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. So you expressed doubt, and you've expressed your doubt to the inspector about the way Mr. Best calculates his 50% and his rebalancing. Are you saying, is it your case that the inspector should ignore the effects of qualitative considerations or not?
No, I don't think you can ignore them, but I don't think you can precisely quantify.
Very nice. Very nice.
Mr. Hodgson.
You cannot.
I was kind of sorry to interrupt. Has somebody left the microphone on? Can I just ask everyone to mute the microphone, please? Apart from Mr. Robson and Mr. Mitchell. I could hear a little bit of background noise. I'm not sure if I can mute anybody.
Mr. Hodgson is now muted. I did try and mute him. I don't know whether it was me that did it. If it was, I found a useful tool for later on.
Mr. Robson, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll have a go at muting. Oh, sorry, that's you.
That's
I do apologise.
That's it. That is a slip, if ever there was one, ma'am.
Oh, I shall let you continue, Mr.
I'm very grateful. Thank you, ma'am. You were saying that it shouldn't be ignored, but the qualitative factors should not be ignored, but they are difficult to quantify. When the inspector looks at your tables that are based upon the drive time catchment areas, should she then take those figures that you are providing as hard and fast gospel fact and reality, or should she factor in a degree of qualitative, include a qualitative factor that may change the outcome of the tables?
I think the inspector should regard essentially all of anybody's calculated figures are calculated figures and are not gospel truth, and they're unlikely to be gospel truth, particularly when we try and project, well, how many cremations are going to go to Rosehill Crematorium in 2034, and we give a number. That is a calculated number. Nobody can guarantee it. The only guaranteed numbers, if you like, are the number of cremations undertaken at a crematorium in a certain year, and where they care to record how many direct cremations they do, and whether they care to complete the survey form from the Cremation Society with that figure. Those are factual figures. All the other calculations are the best efforts of whoever did them to quantify something.
Thank you. Another qualitative factor that's taken into account is service length, and it's the appellant's case that 1 hour and anything less than 1 hour is poor quality. Could you turn up, please, H19, CDH19, which is an appeal decision into a dignity scheme in Norfolk?
Let me, H19, Brandon Road, Wheating.
That's it. And paragraph 14.
Yes.
And there the inspector says, for the purpose of determining need, I consider it reasonable to assess the maximum practical capacity and compare that to existing demand for cremations. The ICCM's document Charter for the Bereaved sets out an objective for a minimum service time of 40 to 45 minutes. And then to note, next sentence, while the appellant intends to offer 1 hour services, as currently do 3 or 4 of the nearest crematoria, the length of service is not included as a right or objective of the Institute, nor is it necessary to achieve a service with sufficient time to allow different funerals to arrive and depart. I consider a service time of 45 minutes is therefore a reasonable assumption to make when assessing capacity. Where exceptionally a funeral party wishes to hold a longer service, that could be arranged on a case-by-case basis, dependent on available time. what do you say the inspector, well, what is your response to the conclusion the inspector reaches in that paragraph?
There's all sorts of evidence that people want to have privacy, time, seclusion when they have a funeral. The last thing they want to see is another group of mourners. I'm very aware of that. And it has now become normal for new crematoria to be launched with 60-minute service intervals. And it's a good thing. This inspector has pointed out that it's an objective. It's actually, it's a sort of a target. The Institute's charter is a target, and I was a director of the Institute when we first promoted the charter many years ago, so I'm very aware of it. I consider a service time of 45 minutes as a reasonable assumption to make when assessing capacity. I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. I think the only way to assess a crematorium's technical and practical capacity and all that jazz is to find out what times it actually offers in the day, and what other service intervals, because they can vary. It's becoming increasingly popular, from what I can see, that people offer a choice. You can have a 60-minute slot at certain times of the day, or a 45-minute slot at other times of the day. So the only way to accurately assess the capacity of that crematorium to offer funerals is to know precisely what they're offering. I think it's a mistake to put any blanket figure. So I'm not quite sure. I think he seems to be saying that it's all very well promoting a 60-minute service, but it's reasonable to have a 45-minute one.
Thank you. Right. Let's go then, please, to the new evidence.
Yes.
And to your conclusions section, please. Section 5, page 10 of 11.
Yep.
Would you just read 5.1 to 5.5, please?
This document presents a new analysis of existing data produced by Montague Evans and by me to inform our assessments of need for the proposed Brodsworth crematorium. It demonstrates that the nascent impact of the two new crematoria at Barnby Moor and Babworth was barely evident in 2019, but that once trading patterns are established and mature, they will have a significant impact upon Rose Hill. I consider that the number of annual cremations that they will divert from Rose Hill lies somewhere between my calculated figure of 460 and Montague Evans' calculated figure of 726 in the year 2027. However, drive time catchment analysis for my proof of evidence suggests that Barnby Done will divert a further 827 cremations from Rose Hill. The combined effect of 3 new crematoria at Barnby Moor, Babworth and Barnby Done completely removes any need for further crematoria provision in the Doncaster area.
Thank you. So taking that second paragraph from your conclusion, it demonstrates that the nascent impact of the 2 new crematoria at Barnby Moor and Babworth was barely evident in 2019. So where does the inspector go in this document to look at the impact of the 2 new crematoria on Barnby Moor, or in your other documents, 2 new crematoria at Barnby Moor and Babworth being barely evident in 2019?
Paragraph 2.2, I explain that Babworth opened in August 2018, Barnby Moor opened in February 2019. There is evidence of their early impact. Their full impact on Rose Hill could not possibly be evident in 2019, the base date for the modelling produced by me and the applicant. The number of deaths within the minimum drive time catchment of Rose Hill in the local authorities that constitute it, I should say, in averaged 8,867 in the 3 years 2016 to 18. So that is pretty much before anything happened in the way of diversion to the new Brodsworth crematorium. And in 2019, there were a very similar number of deaths. There were only 2 less deaths in 2019. Paragraph 2.4, despite only 2 fewer deaths at Rose Hill, there was a drop of 162 in the number of cremations in 2019 compared with the average for the previous years. I consider that this modest fall reflects the early impact of the 2 new crematoria near Retford. I think it's important to note that you build a new crematorium and it takes time for it to become established. The time is variable, but looking at all the crematoria open since 2009, I found an average of 5 to 7 years before they were, before their numbers started to level off. Some crematoria hit the road, hit the floor running and do lots of cremations in the first year. So it doesn't, what I'm saying is that these 2 new crematoria have opened. It will take time for them to be developed, but considering that the number of deaths didn't change, the number of the small fall of 162 in their first year of operation is a strange coincidence. It's because some funerals went from Rose Hill in 2019 to these 2 new crematoria. However, as time passes and they become established, more of the cremations originating from within their minimum drive time catchment will go to them.
If you look at your figure 1, it's on page 5 of the evidence. The figures there, so down in the 5th row, it's for Rose Hill crematorium, total cremations. They are the actual number of cremations taking place.
That is correct, and that includes direct cremations, which is a relatively recent phenomenon and not everybody reports them. And so we've got the direct reported in the grey shaded area for 2018 and 19, but those are actual cremations. Nobody's calculated those, they're real.
So if we take the direct cremations reported out and we go then down to row 8, annual cremations minus direct and diverted cremations, the years 16, 17 and 18, we see that Rose Hill did 2,528, 2,550 and 2,500 cremations. So very consistent performance, and it drops to 2,329 actual cremations in 2019. Now, Mr. Best, in his let's call it the second rebuttal, the document received today, in his second rebuttal says it could have been for a whole number of reasons why there was that drop off. What do you say was the change in 2019 that saw what is a significant drop off in the context of a previous performance that varied only by 50?
Well, I've spoken to the people that own and operate Brodsworth and Barnby Moor crematorium, and they both tell me that in their first year or so of operation, they're now in their second year, that they are attracting far more. Each of them is attracting far more than 64 cremations from within Doncaster. I also had a conversation with Doncaster's bereavement services manager, and he was concerned to notice a drop off in demand. And he said, well, there are some funeral directors that used to come here from the south side of Doncaster that I don't see anymore. So I conclude, as I've said in my late submission, that this drop in 2009 at Rose Hill was the beginning of the full impact, which will take time to develop, of the 2 new crematoria. And if you look at the map, you think, well, Brodsworth is south of Barnby Moor, why would anybody go past Barnby Moor to get to Babworth? Well, there's all sorts of reasons, but they do, apparently. And they effectively share. I mean, my report, my proof of evidence, shows coloured blobs on a map and tells you that these are the minimum drive time catchments. And it shows one that it's saying is Barnby Moor's drive time catchment. Well, technically it is, but because the two crematoria are so close, that they effectively share a catchment. And I did a feasibility study for Bassetlaw Council and said, yes, you need a crematorium and it should be near Retford. And completely independently, these two private developers put in planning applications and built their crematoria. They are there. They will continue to have a growing impact upon cremations at Rose Hill. And using my previous statements, even if they only take from their minimum drive time catchments and don't steal anybody from within Doncaster's minimum drive time catchment, Rose Hill Crematorium's cremation numbers, I anticipate, will see a fall. Now, 2020, I didn't include the numbers because obviously COVID. Who knows the longer term effect of COVID? But within a few years, those two crematoria will be taking more cremations from Rose Hill. And again, when Barnby Dun opens, it won't necessarily the first week, the first year, get all of the cremations closest to it, but within time it will. And the point is that this will significantly reduce the quantitative demand upon Rose Hill to the point whereby, if you want to use these measures, its practical capacity in the peak month of demand, even by 2034, is below this magic 80% threshold that's been recognised. And so I've used the 80% threshold in my need report. I've used it in my reports for other places. It's been accepted, and I'm certainly not the only person that does this, don't misunderstand me. It's widely accepted that if you can show that local crematoria are all operating above this magic threshold, it's an evidence that you need another one. Well, yes, if you look at 2019, the capacity at the capacity level at Rose Hill, the peak capacity in the peak month of demand was crazy. It was 123%. That shouts out, oh, we need a new crematorium. But what I'm saying is, yes, based on those real data, but those real data don't take account of the impact of the two crematoria near Retford that common sense might suggest are irrelevant. And they don't take account of Barnby Moor. When you bring in three, we're not talking one here, we're talking three new crematoria within a reasonable distance of Rose Hill. It has to have an impact. And the impact is so great, you don't need a fourth.
Now, I think one of where we've appeared to get to now with the evidence, with Mr. Best's second rebuttal, is that there is a need to take into account the diversion of cremations from Rose Hill to Barnby Dun, Barnby Moor and Babworth. And the figures that the inspector has in front of her are, in your latest evidence, the figure of 460 on your calculation, or of 726 on the Montague Evans calculation. And then if you have the Montague Evans need statement calculation, and then if you have Mr. Best's second rebuttal to hand, page 13, paragraph 6.4, and the final sentence there says, I have no reason to change my view. In total, at 2034, approximately 64 cremations would be diverted from Rose Hill to Barnby Moor. Now, earlier in the document, Mr. Best says, I'm only going to deal with Barnby Moor because I don't think Babworth is relevant because it's further away and further south. you've spoken to that already. So the inspector has 64 in the latest evidence, 726 in the first Montague Evans need statement, and 460 on your earlier calculations. Taking your 460 first, please could you explain to the inspector where that figure comes from? You may need to go to figure 20 in your original proof of evidence.
Proof of evidence, figure 20.
Yes. Which is on page
Electronically,
47.
page 47.
Thank you.
I've got that.
How do you calculate your 460?
Right. Figure 20 in my proof of evidence is listing the calculated by Magic drive time catchment software. It's showing calculated cremations within the minimum drive time catchments of each crematorium. These numbers are a calculated figure. They are 80% of the numbers of deaths that occurred within each of the mapped catchment areas. This drive time catchment software should be linked with ONS data down to small geographical levels, and it gives you accuracy. This it's a significant point. You use all the best tools you can. You use the best data you can, and then you multiply it by a figure. I've multiplied it by 80% to represent the average cremation rate in England, and you end up with a figure. The figure is not gospel, but it's the best I can do to say, if everybody who lived closer to Rose Hill than to any other crematorium had a cremation at Rose Hill crematorium based upon the population and deaths data in 2019, Rose Hill would have done 2,081. Now that figure,
so just so that we've got everyone in the right page. So we're looking then figure 20, Rose Hill, column 1.
Column 1, Rose Hill, scenario 1, Rose Hill, 2081.
And scenario 1 is?
This is the situation where Barnby Moor, which is listed there, and Babworth, they're both working, but it doesn't include Barnby Dun.
Okay.
So that is based upon real numbers of people living in an area and dying in an area.
Sorry, Mr. Mitchell, I think the inspector.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask a question? Obviously, in that table, Barnby Moor is shown. And you're saying that scenario shows the effect of Barnby Moor and Babworth. I may be missing something, but where's Babworth shown in that table?
As I said earlier, the drive time catchment software treats the two crematoria as having separate catchments, and it does a separate blob on the map, and it's linked to different output areas, but they actually share. However, and all the catchments, each crematorium's catchment, those listed crematoria catchments, you'll see in my maps, in my proof of evidence, you'll see coloured blobs. But it's important to grasp that they are constrained around the edges by the catchments of other crematoria. And in my maps, I've got little black dots and named these what I call the halo crematoria. And I believe that this is the same way that Montague Evans and Memoria's drive time catchment people work. You have to factor in the surrounding crematoria. And I've listed the ones that are surrounding Rose Hill, essentially, or I thought might have an influence on Rose Hill. it transpired that Lee Fields in Gainsborough, according to this drive time catchment stuff, is irrelevant. Barnby Moor doesn't change from the, when you build Barnby Dun, or if you build Brodsworth, Barnby Moor is unaffected. It stays at whatever the 572 figure is, the calculated cremations from within its drive time catchment area. That doesn't change. Lee Fields doesn't change. Rose Hill does change. But if we focus purely upon that figure in scenario 1 Rose Hill 2081, that represents the total number of cremations that arose within Rose Hill's catchment area in 2019. However, as we've seen from other tables, such as in my late submission of figure 1, I've given the actual numbers of cremations occurring, and in 2019, Rose Hill did more than this calculated figure of 2,801. So as the crematoria, Barnby Moor and Babworth, as they appeared on the scene essentially in 2019, I thought, well, I'll leave that figure, which we know has fallen. Let's just take the 3 figures of the 3 preceding years and average those. And then we say, well, what's the difference between the average of what Rose Hill was normally doing and this calculated figure of what it should be doing, 2,801. That's where this 460 comes from.
2081.
Yeah, 2081. Yeah, that's where this diversion figure comes from. I don't show it in figure 1, impact of the 3 crematoria, as 460, but you can see that it's in the row of total cremations. So the 2016 to 19 cremations are real figures. The average of 2,501 is the real average of those real figures. Then my MDC cremations 2081 is the calculated figure, which reflects the full impact of Rose Hill's catchment reducing in size because these 2 new crematoria have opened up. But all these figures, can I just say something? As I said previously, everybody's doing their best and they're calculating figures which are not gospel. May I respectfully suggest to the inspector that when Jameson Hodgson is giving evidence, that he might be asked to give an indication of how many cremations from Doncaster are actually going to his crematorium at Barnby Moor. And I think you'll find that it's significantly more than the 64 calculated by Mr. Best that will take place in 2034, some in the future.
So if we look at Mr. Best's second rebuttal, and it's that sentence at 6.4,
Yes.
page 13, I have no reason to change my view that in total at 2034, approximately 64 cremations would be diverted from Rose Hill to Barnby Moor. What do you say about the reliability of that figure?
It's a calculated figure that's wrong.
Why?
Because I know that far more than 64 cremations went there in 2020 and 2019.
And if we were to look at your figure 1, which is the actual cremations, so figure 1 in your latest evidence, your late evidence, the actual cremations show a difference there of 166 between 2018 and 2019 when was open.
And Barnby Moor.
And Barnby Moor.
So that, I believe that figure represents a loss from Rose Hill to those crematoria.
So if within a few months of opening, there had been a loss of around 166 to Babworth and Barnby Moor, what does that say about the credibility of a loss of 64 from Rose Hill in 2034?
It very much throws the calculations into question.
And the other figure before the inspector is the 726 figure, and you explain where that is taken from in your latest evidence, being from the Montague Evans calculated figure. It's at paragraph 3.1 of your proof of evidence, and Marm, it's CDB 13.
Paragraph, sorry.
CD. Sorry, my computer's just.
Are we in my proof of evidence?
No, we're in CDB 13, which is the Montague Evans needs statement for the planning application. Just to confirm the origin of that 726 figure. And it starts on electronic page 21.
Paragraph 21?
No, electronic page 21.
Yeah.
And we think Mr. Or the author at Montague Evans goes through the calculations, and at paragraph 5.19 states that in the final sentence that the trading figures represent a worst case scenario and are therefore robust.
Yes.
And then looks at that comes to the figure, the 726 figure. At 5.21.
Yes, 726 cremations per year.
It's the third sentence. In total, it is anticipated that 726 cremations per year will be diverted from Rose Hill and 581 from Sherwood Forest.
Yes.
Now, in terms of how that 726 has been calculated, what do you say is the validity of that calculation?
I don't entirely follow Montague Evans' method of calculating things. I get lost in the numbers. I'm just being honest. I get lost in the numbers. But again, it throws into question the validity of the methodology or something. Something's not quite right there.
Thank you. And then you come in your latest evidence, you say, well, it's going to be somewhere between my figure of 460 and Barnby and Montague Evans' figure of 726.
Yes, I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can, that somebody else has come up with a different calculated number from my calculated number, and neither of them are going to be gospel truth. You know, we're never going to know. And I've used my lower figure for the purposes of working out the capacity in one of my tables, and then I use their figure in another one, just to see the difference it makes.
So what do you say then will be the effect on Rose Hill on your 426 figure?
It will be as shown in my table. Let me look at this. My figure 1 in my late submission says in the column headed MDC cremations that right down the bottom in the dark blue, the impact of the 2 new Retford crematoria at levels of deaths in 2019, that's the thing you have to juggle in your head, at 2019 levels, had these two crematoria been fully established and drawing this, whatever, 400 and odd cremations from Rose Hill, this magic, what is the level of practical core capacity in the peak month at Rose Hill, would drop significantly from the average of 137.60 of the previous 137.6% in the previous 4 years to 98.4%. So that's, in my view, staggering. 98.4 is quite clearly more than 80% threshold. But what it's showing is that on a calculated basis, these two Retford crematoria will have a significant impact upon the capacity levels at Rose Hill.
And then when you factor in then Barnby Dun, which
yes,
we now must do.
We factor in Barnby Dun, again, this figure in red of 827. This is a calculated figure based upon the drive times mapping software and the data on deaths in 2019 in Barnby Moors catchment area. Had it been there, had they built the crematorium and its catchment area was real, I'm calculating that it would do 827 cremations that otherwise would have gone to Rose Hill. So we have a combined diversion, people like that word, of cremations from Rose Hill by these three crematoria. We've got 460, 807, 827. I can't do mental arithmetic, but that's a lot of cremations. And at those levels, we look at the bottom line, the blue. We've now dropped the level of practical capacity in the peak month to 58.2%, which is astonishing. So we've got a threshold figure of 80%. Rose Hill is currently way over that. There's no doubt that historically it has well exceeded that 80% threshold. That this is evidence that we need a new crematorium in the area, and this is why Barnby Dun is being built. But because of the combined impact of the two crematoria that at first sight seem to be less than relevant, one of them in particular because it's south, they actually are going to have a significant impact on Rose Hill, not enough by themselves, but combined with Barnby Dun, you've got a very significant impact upon this crematorium that we all say is horrendously working at overcapacity. We need a new crematorium. So the three together will reduce it at 2019 levels to the magic figure of 58%.
And then project, if I could interrupt, please, Mr. Mitchell, just conscious of time, you then project forward to 2034 and come to 68.1%, and that's the final column.
That's the final projection, and that's, again, it's less than this magic 80%.
Yes. Now, figure 2 next, you present the same column headings, except you now introduce Montague Evans 2027 and then Barnby Dun and projected 2034. The conclusions there at the bottom in red are the effective level of unpractical core capacity in the peak month. Briefly, please, what is the difference between figure 1 and figure 2?
Well, in 2034, my figure is 68%. Using the larger diversion in the original Montague Evans report, the capacity level drops to 61% at Rose Hill in 2034. So I'm saying there's a range of calculated diversion from Rose Hill, and either way, in 2034, we're well below the 80%.
And then the next table is figure 4 and figure 6. You look at the impact of using a 60-minute service interval, which reduces the number of services that they can hold, and they are there above the practical core capacity in the peak month, projected forward to 2034. But your conclusion at 4.18 is that Rose Hill could offer at least some 60-minute service intervals and some at 40 minutes to keep below the 80% threshold.
Yes, as I've said, there are quite a few crematoria now that offer a range of service interval times on the same day. So Rose Hill could be like that.
And then that leads to your final conclusion at 5.5 of the effect of the 3 new crematoria at Barnby Moor, Babworth and Barnby Dun completely removes any need for further crematoria provided in the Doncaster area. I want very quickly, because I'm close to running out of time, just to look at the Western Arc. Now, the figures that would be diverted to Barnsley, or from Barnsley, Pontefract and Rotherham, are given in your original proof of evidence.
In my figure 20.
In your figure 20, yes.
These are cremations diverted by the opening of Barnby Dun. Let's get this right. And then by the opening of
Brodsworth. And then at that paragraph 9.69, you say the Brodsworth crematorium will also divert from Barnsley 105, from Pontefract 279, and from Rotherham 119. And then if we scroll down to your figure 21.
Yeah.
It's the impact, that shows the impact of Barnby Dun on existing crematoria, and figure 22 is the impact of Barnby Dun and Brodsworth.
Yes.
So here you're factoring in the effect on the capacity at the Western Arc facilities of Barnsley, Pontefract and Rotherham, and we see there that they are Barnsley 116%, Pontefract 87.1% practical capacity, and Rotherham 109%.
Yep.
In his opening, my learned friend Mr. Village described the effect of the Brodsworth scheme on the Western Arc as providing a significant relief. When you look at your figures we've just been through, would you agree or disagree with Mr. Village's characterisation?
Based upon the drive time catchment analysis done for my proof of evidence, I disagree.
If you were to be advising, you've said you've advised on development of crematoria in the past. If you were to be advising a client where to place a crematoria to best provide significant relief to the overcapacity crematoria in the Western Arc, where would you suggest that they look?
Well, I'd look for a site not in Doncaster, but closer to where they are. Logic. I'm not familiar with the area, but I've looked at the map, and you would build a crematorium west of the proposed Brodsworth location, and find an optimum location to meet the need of the Western Arc, because there is clearly a need.
So is this site at Brodsworth well positioned or not to meet that need in the Western Arc?
In my view, it is not, and if it shifted west, it would have a much greater impact, beneficial impact upon capacity levels at the Western Arc crematoria.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell. Those are my questions in chief. There will be questions from Mr. Village, no doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Robbs and Mr. Mitchell. Would this be a convenient time to take a break before Mr. Village commences cross-examination?
Yes, I would have thought so, if you're going to have a break this afternoon. And just could you remind me, Madam, you have to be away at a certain time. Was it 4:45? It
is, yes. So yeah, I'll just have to stop you short at 4:45. So just bear that in mind in terms of where you're at with the cross-examination.
Keep an eye on the clock. I mean, we're not. It won't surprise you to know going to finish with this witness today.
Indeed, yes. I think it was 3 hours, your original estimate.
Yeah, that was That was, of course, before the late evidence, but I'm trying to reorder things. I don't want to be more than 3 hours.
That would be good. Okay, then, well, we'll have a short adjournment until 4 o'clock. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome back, everyone. It's 4 o'clock and the inquiry is resumed. Mr. Village, you may commence cross-examination of Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Mitchell. I'd like to deal with some aspects of chronology first, if I may, please. Babworth opened in August 2018, didn't it?
I believe that's what I've stated in my late submission.
And Barnby Moor in February 2019, correct?
Let's have a look. Yes, Babworth August 18, Barnby Moor February 19.
Yeah. And the Montague Evans needs statement in support of the application is dated August 2019.
Yes.
And your need assessment in November is dated November 2020.
Yes.
And if we just pause there with your needs statement, you note in the needs statement at paragraph 10.4 that a rival crematorium developer built another crematorium close by at Babworth. And so that's, you refer in 10.4 to Babworth and 10.3 to Barnby Moor, correct?
Yes.
And the report to committee is dated December 2020. Yes?
I don't know. I don't have a copy of that.
No, don't you? Well, it's an inquiry document and we'll be going to it, so you better get your hands on one in due course. I hope to be able to go to it this afternoon. I don't know whether that's going to be possible. In terms of this inquiry, the statement of common ground was on need was settled in September.
Yes.
And proofs were exchanged in September.
Yes.
And in your proof of evidence, in your main proof of evidence, you refer to Babworth at paragraph 8.9, don't you?
Yes.
And also Barnby Moor in the same paragraph.
Yes.
And the way you put it at that stage was a further factor affecting capacity at Rosehill is the yet to be seen full impact of 2 new crematoria to the south of Doncaster, Barnby Moor and Babworth, which will continue to reduce cremation numbers at Rosehill as they become more established. Yes?
Yes.
You gave no figures for diversions from Rosehill to either of those 2 crematoria.
No.
No.
So.
And in your rebuttal proof of evidence, which was, I think, was that exchanged a week before the, was it a week? Thereabouts, anyway. In your rebuttal proof of evidence, you also referred to Barnby Moor and Babworth, did you not?
Barnby, let's have a look. Yes, I see at 4.
I think at 3 point, is it 3 point? Mislaid your. Yes, I don't have it. I have put it down somewhere. If someone can get me another copy, that would be absolutely fantastic.
I've got a section 4 entitled Ignoring the Impact of Barnby Moor upon Rosehill.
Yeah. And I don't think Babworth got a mention, did it, in that document?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so
Search Babworth, see, Rab.
right. So I mean,
No.
and so it is that rather extraordinarily, even by someone as long in the tooth as me, doing this sort of job, we receive against that background effectively a new piece of evidence on Sunday afternoon. Would you just like to explain the circumstances as to how that new piece of evidence came to be produced, please?
I've described it as a new analysis of existing evidence.
Yes.
And you're quite right. I've referred to Barnby Moor and Babworth in various documents.
Yeah.
But I confess that I simply had not made the connection that I'd made on the Friday prior to this inquiry that led me to write that document.
So what was it? Where were you on the Friday when suddenly you were struck by this extraordinary, I suppose, revelation, you would say?
I would say revelation, yes.
Revelation.
I was working at home, reviewing documents in preparation for the inquiry, and was rereading the Montague Evans need statement that supported the original planning application. And on this occasion, more than on the previous occasions, this impact of these two new crematoria struck out. And I'd previously noticed this drop in cremations. I thought, yes, and I said, this is some cremations going to these crematoria or one of these crematoria. But it's when I was looking at my figure 20, I made this connection that I hadn't previously made, that if Rose Hill only undertook in 2000, it's hypothetical, if it only undertook all the 100% of the cremations from within its minimum drive time catchment, it would be doing less. The figure was telling me 2081, and I was looking at the figure of actual cremations, and I looked at deaths, and I was able to think about that this is very interesting. And it just struck me in a new way that these crematoria to the south that seem of relatively modest relevance, that's actually not the case, that it takes time for them to establish. I did say that, but it was quantifying that. That was the difference, quantifying that and seeing what impact it had on the magic practical capacity and the peak month figure.
Well,
surprised me. I thought, what if?
Okay, that's very helpful. But I just want to try and move things along a little bit on this, because I'm going to ask you about the detail in a bit of detail. At 3.2, you say the analysis in my proof of evidence suggests a lower level of diversion of 460 cremations, see figure 20. And I think, Mr. Mitchell, you would have to accept, wouldn't you, that there is nothing which is explained in figure 20 or elsewhere that there is a figure of 460. I mean, you've given us you sent an email subsequently after I complained about not being able to see where this figure came from, but there is nothing just on the face of figure 20 in your main proof of evidence which explains how you get to 460, is there?
That is correct. It was the result of some editing
Yeah.
by my barrister who wanted to trim the document, and that little paragraph slipped out, for which I apologise.
Yeah, well, you accept it's incorrect then, don't you? I mean, I'm not seeking to go behind any confidential discussions with your barrister, and these things happen, but you accept that paragraph 3.2 is incorrect. It's misleading because there wasn't any analysis which gave rise to this 460 figure.
I don't agree with that. Of course, there was an analysis that gave rise to the figure. It's just I didn't add my submitted late analysis document didn't adequately explain that analysis.
Well, no, you say the analysis in my proof of evidence suggests a lower level of diversion of 460. No, it doesn't at all. The analysis doesn't suggest that.
It does. I disagree.
Well, you subsequently had to explain it in a contrived way as to how you get to it. See the email you have sent to us subsequently, but there's nothing in the proof of evidence which explains the analysis, is there?
It's there to be seen in figure 20.
Well, 460.
Not the figure of 460, but
Right.
this. It's all based upon the 100% of the minimum drive time catchments at Rose Hill. That's figure of 2081. That's the key figure. It's the realisation of the significance of that compared to actual performance in the years leading up to the opening of the crematoria at Babworth and Barnby Moor, and the nascent, what I called the nascent impact in 2019 of them. It made me realise that I had certainly projected forward from 2019, looking at future levels of capacity, and I know Mr. Best also does that in one part of his proof of evidence. He tries to be fair and say deaths fluctuate, so I've averaged 3 years to have a representative figure of cremations at Rose Hill for 2019, and he then projects forward based upon that figure. And I did that as well in my own way, in my background research and analysis.
Well, I'm sorry, if you look at...
Sorry to interrupt the cross-examination, Mr. Verge and Mr. Mitchell. There was reference to an email which was sent to yourself, Mr. Village, in terms of explaining how the 460 figure was arrived at. I mean, I'm not aware that I have received that email. And I have to say I was struggling with where the 460 figure came from. I just wondered whether it may assist my deliberations. I don't like it to interrupt cross-examination, but it seemed a relevant point to request that document, if that's.
I'm sorry, madam, that I didn't make it clear where the email is. It's attached as an appendix to the document which you received at lunchtime from us.
Okay.
And it's right at the end. From Mr. Mitchell, sent on the 12th of October. You may recall that right at the outset, I complained that we couldn't see where this figure of 460 came from. And Mr. Mitchell wrote to Mr. Best on the 12th of October saying, in view of the very late submission of the document, it was agreed that it would be helpful all round if you and I could communicate about my new analysis. In particular, Mr. Village queried my para 3.2, in which I gave a figure of 460 cremations diverted by Barnby Moor and Babworth from Rose Hill. I can certainly expand on my paragraph 3.2 now. In figure 20 of my proof of evidence, I illustrate calculated cremations based on 80% of numbers of deaths in 2019 within the MDC of each of 9 crematoria in 3 different scenarios. In scenario 1, the existing situation, I calculate 2,081 cremations at Rose Hill, compared with 2,541, the average of actual cremations at Rose Hill in the 3 years 2016 to 2018 inclusive. This is a reduction of 460 cremations. This reflects the reduction in the extent of Rose Hill's MDC by the new Retford crematoria and the consequent diversion of cremations. So that's how he explains it. And since you've pointed out you didn't have that email in front of you, it obviously my questions might have seemed a little well, difficult to follow, because my point to the witness was that you can't see any analysis, contrary to what he says in his late evidence. You can't see any analysis of where he gets 460, and indeed there's no indication as to how you would even get to 460 without him explaining that what he's done is he's averaged the cremations at Rose Hill and then deducted those from the calculated cremations at Rose Hill.
That's useful. Thank you, Mr. Village. I'd received your rebuttal quite late. I think the case officer was on lunch, so I hadn't quite got to that last page. So thank you for that clarification. It makes a lot more sense now.
Okay, well, madam, I mean, obviously, I'm very sorry you didn't get it earlier, and but that I think that just explains where we've got to. Well, anyway, my point, Mr. Mitchell, and you know, frankly, if you wish to take the point that you had, in truth, in all honesty, Mr. Mitchell, in all honesty, you had in fact undertaken an analysis which suggested a lower level of diversion of 460, then please tell me if you're really saying that, because it will infect the rest of your evidence, I suspect.
Well, in that case, can you just repeat the question? I'm sorry.
You say in this paragraph 3.2, the analysis in my proof of evidence suggests a lower level of diversion of 460. It does nothing of the kind, does it?
I don't agree. I didn't give a lengthy analysis. I just gave the one paragraph that accidentally was left out in my late submission. I'm using the data in that proof of evidence.
Okay.
And did a new analysis. That was the title of the document that I sent. It was new analysis. When as I received this, as you call it, revelation on Friday morning.
Yeah.
So I did this analysis to get to this figure of 460, because the figure of 726 in the Montague Evans need report aroused a new interest in me.
Well,
that I thought.
It may have aroused new interest in you, but you'd had that report. You were actually tasked with commenting on it in 2020, October and November 2020, weren't you?
Indeed, I was.
Yeah. And you didn't take any issue or raise any points about it at that stage, did you?
I'd have to read the documents now to answer the question yes or no. However, you know, I'm a human being. I didn't grasp the significance of something until I was reviewing it in preparation for this inquiry. It's as simple as that. You know, I'm a human being. I didn't spot it. I then realised it had importance.
You're more than a human being, if I may say so. You're an expert witness, or you say you're an expert witness. Right. Mr. Mitchell, we will obviously come back to this issue, but I just wanted to understand why we got to where we have got to with this new, with this late evidence coming in, and I'm going to deal with the points that you've made in due course during the cross-examination. The reason why assessments of need matter in the context of crematoria, Mr. Mitchell, is because it's accepted that the qualitative or quantitative need for crematoria is capable of amounting to a very special circumstance for the purposes of considering the acceptability of development in the greenbelt. That is right, isn't it?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And indeed, the acceptance of that proposition by the council is demonstrated by the grant of planning permission for Barnby Dun to Memoria.
I'm sorry, I thought you said greenbelt and the Barnby Dun.
I'll put the point again, and if you don't understand any questions, you're quite right to ask me to repeat them. The acceptance of the proposition I have just set out and with which you've agreed is demonstrated by the grant by the council of planning permission for Barnby Dun to Memoria.
I thought your proposition related to very special circumstances regarding the greenbelt, and Barnby Dun's not in the greenbelt.
Yes, it is. My proposition does relate to the greenbelt, but the point I'm trying to make is that at the time this was considered in the report committee, which we can go to in a moment, it was accepted in that report where the council dealt with Barnby Dun, that planning permission, that very special circumstances would be a proper basis for granting planning permission. I know that Barnby Dun's obviously in the countryside, but it was accepted by the council at that stage that very special circumstances would exist if there was a demonstrable need. Would you prefer to go to the reports committee?
Well, yes, as I say, I've never seen it.
Well, you've never read the reports committee?
No.
It's document A6. Can you get it in front of me, please?
Oh, let's have a look.
I mean, I don't. You genuinely never seen this document?
No.
Tell me when you've got it in front of you, please.
I've got it in front of me now.
Right, under summary, the need for another crematorium could count as very special circumstances. Yes?
Which paragraph is that?
Third paragraph down under summary.
Summary. This is the committee report. Summary. Right. Summary.
The very first page.
Fair enough. Yes, I'm with you.
An external consultant, that's you, has confirmed that there's an existing unmet need for an additional crematorium in the borough other than Rose Hill, but has advised that by developing the site at Barnby Dun would meet most of that need. It would also meet with planning policy and it's not located within the Greenbelt. The Barnby Dun application is therefore recommended for approval. In the assessment of any residual need, i.e. more than one crematoria, the external report concludes that by developing any one of the two Greenbelt sites would make the Barnby Dun site unviable, therefore providing no issue of need that would count as very, very special circumstances. Now, just pausing there, what the council did was, and I have to say we don't in any way take issue with them for doing this, they assessed the position of whether or not more than one crematorium could be granted planning permission or should be granted planning permission. The reason they didn't grant planning permission for Barnby done on any basis is that you had advised that, the reason they didn't grant planning permission for Brodsworth, my client's side, is that you had advised that it would make the Barnby done site unviable.
I didn't say that.
Well, you're saying that this is an inaccurate recitation of what you advised.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Well, we're just pausing. We'll just go through the document, and so because I know you haven't seen, I know you haven't seen it. Just so you can see what they say, because that's just a summary. We'll go through to, if you go through, please, to paragraph 9.23.
Yes, I'm there.
The report is clear, this is your report, in that there's an overall need for another facility in Doncaster, and in the consultant's opinion, by developing the site at Barnby Dun would meet most of that need. Nevertheless, any one of the three sites would impact on the current overcapacity at Rose Hill.
Yes.
The expert report concludes that if only Brodsworth were consented, then it would bring 23,156 people within a 30-minute drive time of the crematorium, and result in a loss to Rose Hill of 56,000 odd. It would have less of an impact on Rose Hill than would the Barnby Dun scheme. The Barnby Dun scheme has a greater impact on need and is less constrained by planning policy, as it's not in the Greenbelt. That site is therefore preferred. It then goes on, if the Barnby Dun scheme is assumed to be consented, then sufficient unmet need may clearly outweigh the harms to the Greenbelt and other harms, meeting the very special circumstances test. The issue for consideration, therefore, is whether or not there's a residual unmet need for another crematorium in the borough after consent is granted for Barnby Dun. If there is a residual unmet need, is it sufficient, along with other benefits, to clearly outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt and any other harms? As part of the consideration of whether or not there's a residual unmet need for another facility, an important factor for consideration is to ensure the viability of the development and operation of the new crematorium, as developing more than one crematorium could undermine viability. Simply put, a minimum of 800 cremations per year is required, with 1,000 or more per year being preferred to ensure the viability of the development and operation of the new crematorium. And then I think we can just hop over to 9.30. No, I think 9.29. If Conisborough and Barnby Dun were developed, Barnby Dun would not be viable. If Brodsworth and Barnby Dun were developed, Barnby Dun would not be viable. However, the point of issue here is that the Barnby Dun site is the least constrained in policy terms, in that it's not located within the Greenbelt. Barnby Dun is located within CPA, and it's therefore the preferred location that would address the borough's need for a new crematorium. It's clear, therefore, that there is not sufficient need to support two new crematoria once Barnby Dun is consented. If there were sufficient need, then it would be possible for two viable new crematoria to be consented. And that's really what I am getting at. If there was sufficient need, then it's clear, so far as the council is concerned, that that would count as very special circumstances. That's
yes.
right.
Yes.
And then you see here what I said in my opening was the denouement. In summary, there's a clear and expected need for another crematorium within the borough, which could be met by any one of the three proposed application sites. However, 2 of those sites are located within the Greenbelt, where crematoria development is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt. Great weight must therefore be attached to this harm, and whether or not there are any other issues that would count as very special circumstances to outweigh that harm. The need for another facility could count as very special circumstances. However, the Barnby Dun site would meet that need, it would meet planning policy, and it's not located within the Greenbelt. And then this, in the assessment of any residual need, the report concludes that by developing any one of the 2 Greenbelt sites would make the Barnby Dun site unviable, therefore providing no issue of need that would count as very special circumstances to outweigh development in the Greenbelt. As such, the application is contrary to both local and national Greenbelt policies. So it was, I mean, that is a fair summary of the advice you gave, isn't it?
No.
Oh. So you're saying that your colleague inaccurately summarised your position?
Well, my position is within my need assessment report.
Yes.
And if I can draw your attention to paragraph 8.102, that area of the report. Let's look at 8.101.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. So I clearly state in 8.101, whilst these figures relate to constrained 30-minute drive time catchments and do not include potential cremations originating from outside of that limit, they show significant impact upon cremations at Rose Hill. 2 bullet points: if only one of the 3 new crematoria were developed, cremation numbers would fall at Rose Hill, but there would still be sufficient to ensure viability. However, if 2 or more of the 3 proposed new crematoria were developed, cremation numbers would fall more significantly at Rose Hill, sufficient to compromise its continuing viability. And I would remind you that I said the figures relate to 30-minute drive time catchments and do not include potential cremations from outside of the area. And then at 8.102, similarly, the viability of the proposed new crematoria could be affected if 2 or more were developed. If Brodsworth and either Barnby Dun or Conisbrough were developed, Brodsworth would appear to still attract sufficient cremations to be viable, but the viability of the other is doubtful. Again, I use that expression on the next paragraph. The viability of Barnby Dun is doubtful. If all 3 were developed, it is unlikely that any one of them would attract sufficient cremations to be viable. So I've clearly prefaced my remarks by saying it's all based upon a 30-minute drive time catchment and there doesn't include cremations from outside. I've not used the expression would not be viable.
Well, you've told the officer who received this report and who was expected to summarise it to members that the viability of a second by granting planning permission for a second crematorium would, in the case of Barnby Dun, it would put doubt over its viability. That's what you say in 8.1.
Yes. I'm saying it.
I mean, just so, I mean, we're all clear where this is going. I'm sure you're perfectly aware where it's going. It is now agreed as a matter of fact that the grant of planning permission to Brodsworth in this case would not adversely affect or render Barnby Dun unviable.
That's right. In my proof of evidence, I've used the minimum drive time catchment numbers to calculate cremations at 80%. that show that is the case, that the development of Brodsworth would reduce cremations at Barnby Dun by, I think I say 235, but the remaining number of cremations at Barnby Dun is above the 800 that seems to be recognised as a threshold of viability.
And then at 8.115, you say the development, and in fact, you then at 8.108, you do a quantitative need drive time catchment analysis summary. And at 8.115, you say the development of any two of the three proposed crematoria would affect the distribution of cremations to such an extent that the viability of one of the new crematoria and the continued viability of Rose Hill Crematorium could be questionable.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't make an absolute statement, but based on the results of 30-minute drive time analysis, it would be questionable.
Well, I mean, just go back to that point, because if you're now seeking to effectively slip out of responsibility for saying that the viability is doubtful, why didn't you make it clear at the time in this report that in fact that if you increase the drive time to 45 minutes, that would negate any suggestion of adverse viability?
I refer you to the earlier paragraph where I state that it didn't, the 30-minute drive time is based on 30 minutes.
Yeah.
That there would be other cremations. I didn't undertake that analysis of 45 minutes.
But you clearly say that the figures relate to constrained 30-minute drive time catchments, don't include potential cremations originating from outside that limit. They show significant impact on cremations at Rose Hill. And then you go on to make these points about viability. I mean, effectively what you're now saying to the inspector is, oh, well, that doesn't matter, because in fact, if you included the position from 45 minutes, I wouldn't have suggested it would adversely impact on viability.
Definitely increasing the drive time catchment increases the number of cremations, and my proof of evidence shows that if you include the entire minimum drive time catchment, then Brodsworth would not make Barnby Dun unviable. Well,
why didn't you say that in this report? Why did you?
I haven't done the 45-minute drive time catchment analysis, so I couldn't say so.
No, but what, you've raised the spectre, and indeed successfully raised the spectre of unviability in the report in paragraph 8.102. And if your position is now, well, of course, if you include the 45 minutes, then there wouldn't be a problem. Why didn't you say that? I mean, what you've done is you've misled the planning officer by this statement, haven't you?
I can assure you there was no intention to mislead.
Well, there may not have been any intention, but that's clearly what happened, isn't it?
The planning officer has interpreted what I said as to make a crematorium unviable. But as I say, I clearly stated that the figures relate to a 30-minute drive time. They do not include potential cremations from originating outside of the limit.
Well, even that's not right.
My paragraph 8.101.
Turn to paragraph 1.12, please.
1.12. 1.12.
Of which document, Mr. Village?
Same document, the needs assessment, Mum.
Oh, I've got 11.12 for some reason. So 1.12. This report considers that the location of Barnby Down best meets the need for a new crematorium based upon the population living within its constrained 45-minute drive time catchment. Yes.
Yeah. So the reader at a very early stage would have understood you to be looking at the 45-minute catchment area.
The tables in my report also clearly labelled as to which drive time catchment they refer.
The person you were directing this to, was it Miss Sudders?
Yes.
Yeah. So she wrote the report, I think. Correct it if I'm wrong.
I presume so. I presume so.
Yeah. So what you're now saying is that in fact, oh dear. In fact, this report's been misconstrued because if you in fact take the 45-minute drive time, the position would be that there wouldn't be any effect on the viability of Barnby Down. Is that right?
I didn't think that at the time. It was a question of using a recognised drive time. The 30-minute drive time catchment is held at appeal to be terribly important, and I used that, and as far as I'm concerned, made it clear in the paragraph I've quoted several times that it was based upon that, and that other cremations originating from beyond that would be relevant, or whatever the word was that I used. It didn't include any potential cremations from beyond that area.
Right. Okay, well, let's just now be clear about what you're saying in relation to Rose Hill. The council's case is not now, never has been, that granting planning permission to Brodsworth now would adversely affect viability. That's right, isn't it?
In my need assessment, I'm just trying to remember, there's so many documents. Let me view web page navigation, first page. If we look at the table of contents page on my need assessment report, which is electronically page 5, let me see. Yes, I've got in section 8 at 8.90, and it's there on the table of contents. I'm now going to go to 8.90. 8.90. Viability of Rose Hill and proposed crematoria.
Yeah.
So again, clearly stating at 8.92, the table below considers only constrained 30-minute drive time catchment populations, and refer to 8.93, the second bullet point. If both Conisbrough and Barnby Dun were developed, Conisbrough exceeds the threshold, Barnby Dun's 30-minute catchment and that of Rose Hill both drop below the threshold being the FBCA 120,000 catchment population.
Very simple question before the inspector goes in 1 minute's time. Is it the council's case that granting planning permission now for Brodsworth would cause Rose Hill to be unviable?
It would have an impact on the viability of the conjoined cemetery and crematorium service, but it's not been quantified. It's very difficult to quantify as to whether that would, well, it wouldn't lead to the closure of the crematorium. They'd have to keep it running. It would significantly impact upon the operation of the cemeteries and crematorium service in terms of the current arrangements whereby the loss on the cemeteries is offset by the surplus at the crematoria. It'd have an impact for local taxation, I presume.
Okay, so but there's no suggestion of any existential threat to Rose Hill by granting planning permission in this case, is there?
No, I'm saying it would have a disproportionate effect upon Rose Hill, but Rose Hill wouldn't close down.
Madam, it's 1:45, so we haven't got very far, I'm afraid.
I'd better go before I get scolded by the teacher. So yes, if we could adjourn, obviously Mr. Mitchell, if you can avoid any communication overnight with Mr. Robson, and we shall adjourn to 9:30, acceptable to parties tomorrow morning. We shall reconvene then. Thank you for your contributions.
Thank you, ma'am.